American gods. The air in the prison was stale, heavy with the scent of disinfectant and despair. Shadow Moon sat on the edge of his bunk, his large hands clasped tightly in his lap, counting down the days until his release. 3 days. Just 3 more days and he'd be free, back in the arms of his beloved wife Laura, ready to start a new life. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The warden's office was cold, sterile, a place where dreams came to die. Shadow stood before the desk, his imposing frame seemingly shrunk by the weight of the news he'd just received. Laura was dead. A car accident. And to add a cruel twist to an already bitter fate, she'd been with his best friend Robbie. "We're releasing you early," the warden said, his voice a monotone that barely registered in Shadow's grief-stricken mind. "On account of the circumstances." Shadow nodded numbly, the world around him seeming to fade into a gray haze. As he walked out of the prison gates, a free man but more shackled than ever by loss and betrayal, the sky opened up. Rain poured down, soaking him to the skin, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for his shattered world. The airport was a blur of noise and motion, people rushing to and fro, their lives continuing as if the world hadn't just ended. Shadow sat in the terminal, a ticket to Eagle Point clutched in his hand, waiting for a flight that seemed as distant as his hopes for the future. It was there, in that liminal space, between freedom and a home that no longer existed, that Shadow met Mimir. Wednesday. The old man seemed to appear out of nowhere, taking the seat next to Shadow with a grace that belied his age. "You look like a man who could use a drink," Wednesday said, his one eye twinkling with mischief and something darker, something older. Shadow shook his head, but Wednesday was already signaling a passing waitress. "2 Jack Daniels, my dear," he said with a wink that made the young woman blush as the amber liquid burned its way down Shadow's throat. Wednesday leaned in close. "I have a job proposition for you, my boy," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "How would you like to be my bodyguard?" Shadow laughed, a hollow sound that held no mirth. "I don't think you want to hire me." "Not now. I'm not in a good place." Wednesday's smile was sharp, predatory. "Oh, but that's exactly why I want to hire you. A man with nothing left to lose is a man who can do anything." And so began Shadow's journey into a world he never knew existed. A world where gods walked among men, where belief had power, and where an ancient battle was brewing beneath the surface of modern America. The road stretched out before them, an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heart of the country. Wednesday's car, a behemoth from a bygone era, devoured the miles as Shadow watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to rolling farmland to desolate prairie. They stopped in small towns with names like Lookout Mountain and Cherryvale, places that seemed frozen in time, where the old gods still held sway. In a rundown bar in the middle of nowhere, Shadow met Mad Sweeney, a towering Irishman who claimed to be a leprechaun. "Show me a trick," Sweeney demanded, his words slurred by whiskey and ancient magic. Shadow, remembering the coin tricks he'd practiced endlessly in prison, pulled out a quarter. He made it dance across his knuckles, disappear into thin air, only to reappear behind Sweeney's ear. The Irishman laughed, a booming sound that shook the rafters. "Not bad, not bad. But let me show you a real trick." And with that, he began to pull gold coins out of thin air. A cascade of impossible wealth that clattered on the bar top. Later that night, as Shadow lay in a motel bed that had seen better days, the weight of his new reality began to sink in. He was working for a man, a god he didn't understand, in a world that didn't make sense anymore. And somewhere out there, Laura's body was lying cold in a morgue, waiting for him to lay her to rest. The funeral was a surreal affair. Shadow stood by the graveside, watching as they lowered Laura's casket into the ground. He felt disconnected, as if he were watching a movie of someone else's life. Robbie's widow, Audrey, approached him, her face a mask of grief and anger. "Ye died with my husband's cock in her mouth," Audrey hissed, her words a dagger aimed at Shadow's heart. But before Shadow could respond, could even process the cruelty of her statement, the world shifted. The graveyard faded away, replaced by a vast starlit plain. And there, standing before him, was Laura. She looked just as she had in life, beautiful and vibrant. But there was something different, something otherworldly about her now. "Oh, Annie," she said, her voice filled with a sadness that transcended death. "I'm so sorry." Shadow reached out to touch her, but his hand passed through her form like smoke. "Laura," he choked out. "What's happening?" "I don't know," she replied, her form already beginning to fade. "But I'll find you again. I promise." Shadow woke with a start, the motel room dark and quiet. But there, on the pillow next to him, lay a single gold coin, one of Mad Sweeney's impossible coins. And Shadow knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that his journey was only just beginning. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Shadow and Wednesday hit the road again. Their destination was the House on the Rock, a bizarre tourist attraction in Wisconsin that Wednesday claimed was a place of power. The house was a labyrinth of oddities, a monument to one man's eccentric vision. Shadow followed Wednesday through rooms filled with automated orchestras, collections of armor, and the world's largest carousel. It was on this carousel, a whirling dervish of light and motion, that Shadow's world tilted on its axis once more. As the carousel spun faster and faster, reality seemed to blur. Shadow found himself in a vast hall, surrounded by beings that could only be described as gods. There was Cernobog, the Slavic god of darkness, his face etched with the lines of forgotten battles. Beside him stood the Zoria sisters, keepers of the morning, evening, and midnight stars, and many more, gods from every corner of the earth, all gathered in this impossible place. Wednesday stood before them, his one eye blazing with an inner fire. "My friends," he boomed, his voice carrying the weight of ages, "the time has come. The old gods are fading, forgotten by a world that once revered us. But we will not go quietly into that good night. We will fight." A murmur ran through the assembled deities, a mix of hope and skepticism. Shadow watched, overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of it all. These were gods, beings of immense power, and yet they seemed diminished somehow, worn down by time and neglect. As the meeting dissolved into heated arguments and old grudges, Wednesday pulled Shadow aside. "What do you think, my boy?" he asked, a sly smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Shadow shook his head, still trying to process what he'd seen. I think I'm in way over my head." Wednesday's laugh was like thunder rolling across the plains. "Oh, you have know that it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Wednesday and Shadow crisscrossed the country, recruiting old gods for their cause. They met Ibis and Jackal, ancient Egyptian deities, now running a funeral home in Cairo, Illinois. In San Francisco they encountered Easter, once a powerful goddess of spring and rebirth, now reduced to sharing her holiday with a resurrected carpenter. But it wasn't just the old gods they encountered. Shadow began to see the new gods as well. The deities of technology and media, of government conspiracies and global finance. These new gods were sleek, powerful, and hungry, eager to supplant their older counterparts in the hearts and minds of humanity. Through it all, Shadow felt like a man caught between two worlds, never quite belonging to either. He performed tasks for Wednesday, delivered messages, and stood as a silent guardian. But always, in the back of his mind, was the memory of Laura and the promise of her return. It was in a small town in Kentucky that Shadow's past finally caught up with him. He was sitting in a diner, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the Carter administration, when the bell over the door jingled. Shadow looked up, and his heart stopped. Laura stood in the doorway, pale and perfect, looking exactly as she had the day he'd left for prison. But there was something off about her, a stillness that went beyond mere calm. As she approached his table, Shadow caught the faint scent of formaldehyde and roses. "Hey, puppy," Laura said, sliding into the booth across from him. Her voice was the same, but there was an emptiness behind her eyes that sent a chill down Shadow's spine. "Laura," he breathed, unable to believe what he was seeing. "How? You're dead." She smiled, a sad little quirk of her lips. "Yeah, about that. Seems like death didn't quite take." As Laura explained her resurrection, her quest to find Shadow, the diner around them seemed to fade away. Shadow listened, his mind reeling, as his dead wife spoke of her journey across the country, guided by some inexplicable force. "I'm not alive," Laura said, reaching out to take Shadow's hand. Her touch was cold, lifeless. "But I'm not exactly dead either. I'm something in between. And I need your help, Shadow. I need you to help me live again." Before Shadow could respond, the diner's door burst open. Mr. Wednesday stormed in, his face a thundercloud of rage. "Step away from him," he growled at Laura, his voice carrying the promise of violence.